On today's agenda, I think we have 3 items, and Mr. Pearson, would you like to begin?
I would, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Pearson, Finance Director, and I'm sorry for being corny, but I can't let it pass without wishing you all a happy fiscal new year, July 1st. We have 3 items on the agenda for the Finance Committee today. All 3 are investment related. I think we'll start, with your permission, with item number 1 on the committee's agenda, which is the May 2008 investment report. And as you know, normally, as it is not a quarter-end report, I don't really have a thorough formal presentation, but I would like to highlight just a couple things from the report, and I've asked Jill to put the first one up on the overhead, which is the page 1 of the investment report, the activity and interest report as of May 30th. 30 days says September, May 31st. And particularly, I was going to point out that during the month of May, we had $8 million in purchases or deposits. $4 million of that $8 million, half of it represented deposits to the state of California's local agency investment fund, which, as you well know, is the fund that the city uses for its overnight money. And the other $4 million represent 2 purchases of Federal Home Loan Bank bonds, federal agencies, AAA rated. And then we also had during the month $12.5 million worth of maturities and withdrawals. And out of that 12.5, all but $2 million of it represented LAIF withdrawals. So during the month we had a fair amount of LAIF activity. In part that's because LAIF, surprisingly somewhat, as a money market fund essentially, is still yielding substantially more than the interest rates that we can earn on government agency bonds. So we were active users of LAIF during the month of May. The other maturity, the only maturity during the month, was a callable bond that was indeed called, $2 million Federal Home Loan Bank note that was called on May 15th. So that was the activity for the month. And then the other schedule I want to ask Jill to put up is the page 2, the summary of cash and investments at May 31st. And the bottom half, if you would, Jill, which is the ending balance as of May. And particularly what you see there is that the total cash and investments the city had on hand at May 31st was just a little bit shy of $175 million. $43 million of it was in LAIF. The biggest piece of all was the federal agency issues, coupon issues of $98.5 million. And corporate medium-term notes, which are private sector bonds, essentially, of about $19.2 million. And you can see that the yield to maturity on the entire portfolio at May 31st was about 4.4%, 4.38%, with an average days to maturity of 574 days. So that's where we stood at May 31st, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Ms. Snyder.
Thank you. Back to the activity. So you answered almost all my questions with your statement there. So the call, there's just a lot of purchases and withdrawals within a few days of each other. So when the Federal Home Loan Bank call happened of $2 million, did that $2 million then, was that also the deposit into LAIF that same day? Did it just switch over?
Yes.
Okay. So it was because it was called and moved it back into.
Right.
Because when you first look at this, you're putting money into LAIF and then taking it out of LAIF a couple of days later, and so it's sort of like, well, why bother doing all that work? But if it's because of the yield or the percentage back and forth, depending on how the timing of putting it in and taking it out, it just seems like a lot of activity.
It is a lot of activity,
yeah.
and the reason for that is because we do earn money on our Santa Barbara Bank and Trust sweep account. So money that is in our checking account, essentially, every night is swept into an overnight investment where they pay us interest. But we are at a historically high spread between the rate of interest that Santa Barbara Bank and Trust pays us on our overnight money and the amount of money, or the interest rate rather, that LAIF is currently yielding. And so even if it's only $2 million, the fact of the matter is that the spread is about 150 basis points, or a full 1.5%.
Okay.
And so it really makes sense to us to send money up to LAIF, even if it's only for a couple nights. It may only be $25 or $30 worth of additional interest, but it's just good practice.
Sure.
Because over the course of the year, that might end up being a couple thousand or $5,000.
Right.
And so normally the spread between those two interest rates is not as wide as it is now, and therefore it really doesn't matter if we let the money sit in the checking account, the sweep account overnight, an extra night or two. But with that wide of a spread, we really have tried to get as much money up into LAIF.
And it's safe to do that just because you can get money out of LAIF within a day if you call them by, 10 in the morning?
We call
or
them by
something
10 in the
like-
morning,
right.
and we have it by 11:30 in the morning in our account.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I just had a comment, I guess, on corporate medium term.
Yes.
On my report here, it's page 5. I don't think that's up on the screen. Anyway, I was just the headlines on the internet this morning all dealt with the reports that they think the automobile industry is going to have like the worst quarter ever, and I just noticed Toyota Motor Credit in there. That's one of the better ones, but still in all, it's a sector that's in trouble. And I was just interested in seeing that sitting in there.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Certainly, the automotive industry is under a duress, but this is an independent financing arm, and so I feel a little more secure with that. I also feel secure that the Toyota Motor Credit is a AAA rated credit, and so it would have to fall dramatically before I would get concerned about the security of the piece of paper. And obviously, if that started to appear to be something that might happen, we would undoubtedly sell the investment long before it ever got to, even a single A or single A minus.
Yeah, this type of investment, I think what we're saying is more of just an investment vehicle and not so much related to the sector and the commodity and
that's correct.
That kind of thing. Is there a motion on this report from anyone?
I'll move it to consent.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I think the next item is our item number 4, which is the Statement of Investment Policy and Delegation of Investment Authority for fiscal year 2009. Back to Mr. Pearson.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, that's correct. Each year, as you know, the city has an investment policy. We've had one since about 1994, when we adopted our first written statement of investment policy. And under the policy, each year we bring it back to the City Council, the Finance Committee first, and then the City Council, and get you to reauthorize it for another year. Included in that investment policy is the delegation of authority under which the City Council delegates to the city administrator / clerk / treasurer the authority to buy, sell, and manage investments on behalf of the city. And then within the policy, it sets forth that the city administrator then delegates that authority to the finance director for the day-to-day management. So that's kind of the structure. And we are no longer required under state law to have an investment policy, but obviously, in my opinion, and I know you would agree, that good practice dictates that we continue to have a meaningful investment policy, one that is reviewed annually and updated as necessary. And so that's why we're bringing this back to you. And in addition, we would need the annual delegation of authority anyway. So in this case, one of the opportunities that this gives us is to consider and review any changes made to the state government code governing municipal investments, local agency investing, and to decide whether or not we choose to, if it is optional, whether we choose to incorporate those changes into state law into our own investment policy. And this year is a case where there was a change to state law governing permitted investments for local agencies, and I'm recommending to you that we not incorporate that change in state law into our investment policy. Previously, before this change to state law, we were allowed to invest in bonds, notes, or other evidence of indebtedness issued by the state of California or any of its political subdivisions. The state law was changed last year to expand that to allow local agencies to invest in the bonds, notes, or other evidence of indebtedness of any of the 50 states and its local subdivisions. We're not recommending that we incorporate that expanded permitted investment into our policy for this year. I don't really see the need to. As you know, virtually all of the debt issued by state and local governments is issued tax exempt. And because it's tax exempt, the rates of return are substantially lower most times than the rates we can earn by investing in the taxable market like U.S. Treasuries and agencies. And I just did not see and don't see the need at this point to have the ability to invest in the debt of other states or local governments within other states. If we do see a need that arises in the future, we can certainly bring that back to you at some point in the future for an amendment to our investment policy. But that was the only change in state law, and we carefully reviewed our own investment policy as we do every year, and we're not recommending any changes to the investment policy at all for this year, so it would be the same policy one more year.
Yeah, you and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit, and I can't see any advantage in changing our policy to permit that change, which the state permits at this point. So I, for one, am happy that we have a good policy here, and I'm willing to proceed with that. Anybody else have a comment? Ms. Falcone?
Well, at this point, I certainly agree. If we do decide to invest in the great state of New York or some other locality that is suddenly deciding to give us, double-digit interest on something or another, then we can always bring it back and amend, correct?
That is correct.
I don't see any point in doing it right now. And unless and until the state of California really starts falling on its belly, then, we might want to have this conversation again. So I will happily move staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Our last item today is titled Interim Financing for the New Airport Rental Car Joint Use Quick Turnaround Facility. And I see we have some representatives from the airport here. And Mr. Pearson, you want to introduce them or
Sure.
cover it yourself?
I think we have Karen Ramsdell, the airport director, Hazel Johns, the assistant airport director, and Tracy Lincoln, operations manager. So they will be able to answer any questions you will have about the project itself. I'm going to speak to the financing, which is really the point of the recommendation before the Finance Committee today. As you know, however, the contract award is on the council agenda, administrative agenda for this afternoon. And so this is something that if the committee isn't comfortable with for any reason, we would have to pull the contract award. We, of course, hope that isn't the case, but we also understand that this is something that we haven't done for some time at a minimum, and I'm not sure I can remember we've done something like this before. So we certainly want you to be comfortable with it. Essentially, give a little bit of background. As you know, the airport staff, along with support from the finance department and the city attorney's office, and our bond professionals, are moving towards the issuance of a airport debt issue this fall in October or November to finance the airport terminal project. And as part of that project is this piece of it, which is a new airport rental car joint use quick turnaround facility. That's a mouthful, but it's essentially a facility that we will be building for use by the rental car companies that serve the airport. They will use it jointly, all of them will. They call it a quick turnaround facility because it'll allow them to gas, to clean, minor maintenance, service, storage, for their vehicles that they rent from the airport location. As I mentioned, this is going to be part of the long-term airport terminal project financing, which is issued in October or November. The issue arose, however, that we are ready to go to award the bid on this piece of the project now. And while, again, the airport staff may want to speak to this if I mess it up, but essentially we do need to proceed with this piece now because one of the first components of the terminal project will be the demolition of the existing rental car facility. And so we've got to get this piece going so that the rental car companies will have a facility to use at such time as their existing facility gets demoed. So we have to start now ahead of the long-term financing that, again, I said twice now, expected for October or November. And so what we really needed to do was to identify an interim funding mechanism to allow the airport to do the bid award for this piece now, even though the long-term financing won't take place until October or November. And so in talking with the city attorney's office, we have come up with a way we believe that we can do this, and we can do it in conformance with our own investment policy, and we can do it in a manner which I believe is a win-win for both the city and the airport. It's a win for the airport because it provides them with the inner financing that they need for this facility without having to go to the traditional bond market for a short-term debt issuance. We could do that. It would take time, and it would certainly cost money. Transaction costs, anytime you go to Wall Street to borrow money, can run easily and does run easily into the six figures. So by doing it this way, the airport does not have to incur any transaction costs, and they get to proceed with their facility. From a city perspective, it's a win because the terms of this of the deal that we're proposing is going to be a 6-month promissory note that would be issued by the airport at a 6.5% interest rate. And again, it would be 6 months. And what we will do is we will take that promissory note, which will be drafted by the city attorney's office, and we will buy that promissory note into the city's investment portfolio. And as a debt of the city, and I quoted a section of our investment policy in the agenda report, as a debt of the city, it is an authorized investment under our investment policy. And so we will buy that investment, and at a 6.5% interest rate, that is certainly, as you remember from our investment report for the month of May, that's substantially higher than the average yield on our investment portfolio at this time. And so really it allows us to accomplish all of the objectives. I wanted to say that the 6.5% interest rate, I arrived at that after consultation with our financial advisor that helps us with the bond issuance, because as a facility that will be used by private sector businesses, it's what's called a private activity bond, and that means it's a taxable bond, meaning that the people who buy the bonds will have to pay income tax on the interest that they earn on these bonds. It's not a public facility, and therefore we cannot finance it with tax-exempt bonds. And so when I asked our financial advisor what's the going rate for a taxable debt of this nature, they sent me a number of examples of recently issued California municipal taxable debt. And the 6.5% appeared to be right in the heart of the range for those types of deals. So, excuse me. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about having the airport issue a promissory note for 6 months. The fact is that because the long-term financing is scheduled for October and November, we should be able to repay the airport should be able to repay the promissory note from the proceeds of the long-term debt that we issue in the fall. The other thing that's worth noting about this is because it is on behalf or for the benefit of the rental car companies, the ultimate repayment of all of the debt, the cost of this facility, is coming from what's called a customer facility charge, which is a $10 per rental car contract surcharge added on every rental car contract at the airport. And so essentially the rental car customers are paying for the facility. And that surcharge has been in effect since January of 2006. And we've already collected about $1.6 million from that surcharge. Most of that money has been spent on the design of this facility. And so we do have a dedicated source of repayment. If the terminal project for some reason was to be delayed, the financing was to be delayed, which is what we look at as our immediate source of repayment of the short-term promissory note, we would still have the ability to go out to Wall Street to borrow long-term on a taxable basis, simply to refinance, if you will, this facility. At an $8 million deal would certainly be large enough to warrant doing that for a long-term deal. And with the dedicated source of repayment, we really should have no trouble at all selling those bonds. So hopefully I've explained
This is
it.
primarily a financially oriented staff report, as it should be. But when it gets to council, has the architecture, the solar, the water saving characteristics, has that all been included in this design? Can you?
The project is of a LEED silver design, and we will have the solar canopies in the storage, car storage part of the project as well.
They are washing the cars there, aren't they?
That's
And so are they saving the water, or do you know how that works?
it's a recycled water.
Okay, fine. Committee questions, Ms. Falcone.
Well, thank you. I think this is a brilliant way to go, quite frankly. I don't see why we would want to do it any other way when we can actually make money on it. And just for simplicity's sake, the facility that you're planning on building, the facility that is there at the rental car, which is at the far south end of the airport, is going to be relocated exactly where? And this is not where people go from the terminal to rent their cars. This is where the cars are housed and stored and washed and maintained and so forth. People will be able to rent their cars directly inside the terminal, is my understanding. But where is this support facility exactly for folks?
It's on the north side. Oh, I see. It's on the north side of Hollister, on Love Place. I don't know if you, next door to the Southern California Edison.
Near the Edison complex
That's
there on
right.
David Love
Correct.
Place. Okay,
Correct.
great. Just so people get oriented. Now, that land, although we are going to be building the facility, the users will have, I assume, some kind of long-term leases. They are not. This is not a purchase of property. This is a building that they will then use for X amount of time, some long-term
That's
lease
correct.
arrangement? Okay, all right. I have one totally off-topic point. Since there are cameras, there's a rumor floating around that some of the airlines are grounding planes. And is there anything that we need to know about service at the airport? I know it's not exactly on our agenda, but it is airport and facilities related. So I'm just wondering if you can enlighten us at this moment.
Right. I was putting together a memo for council to kind of have the latest information that I know. But at this point, we have about 5, I don't know if you've been able to confirm that one from Phoenix.
Yes.
About 5 flights that will be discontinued, which is about 11% of our daily flights, as compared to the recent events at San Luis Obispo Airport, where they're losing about 50% of their daily departures.
50.
So they're taking a very big hit. The other 2 airports in the Tri-County, Santa Maria and Oxnard, really have minimal service, like 4 and 5 flights a day. So you can kind of see what the airlines are doing. Not to say that in the future we wouldn't be losing or trading out flights, but the airlines are also discontinuing use of their prop planes, as we'll see with American Airlines. While they're canceling one flight to Los Angeles, they'll be taking out all of their prop planes and replacing them with 44-seat regional jets. So in that case, we're actually gaining seats. We're not losing seats. And United next summer will start replacing their prop planes, and I expect that we'll see some regional jets. We may not have as many flights, but we'll have more seats.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to go off topic. I'm happy to move staff recommendation when the time is right.
That's fine. I'll second that motion. The time seems right. I'll just add that I think this is a good way to go. It's better to pay the general fund than to pay Wall Street for any kind of fees associated. And, to me, what's important is that this terminal project is as smooth as possible, and the timing of this is very important. So it seems like if we're going to have to do this demolition of that facility now, we need to get all our financial ducks in a row, and this is a good way to do it, and I appreciate the creativity behind it. So I look for it. I'll happily support the motion.
On my part, having sat here in this committee for 6 going on 7 years, it's not too often you see a win-win situation, and this one seems like that is what it is to me, and so that the airport gets the benefit of good financing and a quick turnaround, and the city benefits as well. So I'm happy to call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Pearson, do you have anything else for the committee today?
No, we don't, sir.
If not, then we'll call for the adjournment. Thank you.
Thank you.